Honourable Ministers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your presence here. Here, this is an ICT Ministerial and Regulatory Roundtable for Common Digital Free Trade Area. And there's a pertinent question that we have to answer. How do we realize a single digital market for 1 billion Africans? That is a question that we have to ponder, figure out, think about, and find a solution for. And as you will understand, there are fundamental policy and regulatory requirements and instruments that we have to put in place in order to be able to answer this question adequately. And without much further ado, I'd like to invite Didier Richinfra. He is going to put it into perspective at the end of this session. What actually are we going to walk away with? What are the objectives specifically as we ponder this question and figure out how to answer this question? Didier.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon again to all. Welcome. We are very honored and pleased to have you in this room today for an ICT Ministerial and Regulator Roundtable. Well, although the setup is not really a roundtable, but a typical roundtable, we look forward to have a good and a very rich conversation today. My name is Didier Ngurikimfura. I'm heading Technology and Innovation in Smart Africa. And we would like to, just in a few minutes, to sort of provide a bit of context on behalf of the Executive Director who is joining us in the next few minutes. We, in light with the theme of this year, accelerating the single digital market, Smart Africa has been convening different conversations about how we want to craft the future of our continent. From the very beginning, when our leaders met here in Kigali 4 years ago, they decided to join the efforts to create this single digital market. A market where people can enjoy the digital economy, the services, in a way that where borders no longer matter. From a country to another, we want our citizens to be able to continue to experience the digital services online and with a very harmonized framework across the continent on policy and regulations. So the Secretariat took an effort to develop a strategy, a digital free trade area strategy that really is the single digital market, in other words, and that's capitalized on the efforts that we've witnessed in the continent, especially recently at this very place when we had 44 head of state and government here signing the common free trade area for Africa. So the time is just right and ripe, and we would like, essentially during this session, which will be conducted over lunch, to get your insight about what are the key policy and regulatory considerations that need to be taken into account for the next few years, but we will be able actually to even narrow down to the top 2 and 3 policy and regulatory priorities that will be the focus for the next 12 to 18 months. With the support of the Secretariat, we're intending to coordinate a lot of conversation that will follow this one on the priorities that will be selected. And these priorities are coming from you. We have here in this room honorable ministers from countries from Smart Africa, participant here today. We have regulators who came from also our various countries. We have the captains of the industry, and we have also the academia. So we look forward to a very rich and dynamic conversation, and this conversation will be facilitated by a team of consultants that we brought on board to help us drive this conversation towards the expected outcome. So by the end of this session, we'll be able not only to identify on the different layers which are the key policies and regulations that are needed, but also to narrow down to the top 3 focus on policy and regulation that we'll have, and that will be our focus, and we'll continue this conversation in the course of the year so that we can be able to achieve results in the nearest future. I would like for us also to give you an example that is something actually which is already happening. Last year, the Council of African Regulator was born. It was born in May on the sideline of Transform Africa Summit. And since then, regulators met 4 times. In September, in July and September in Kigali, but they also met in Guinea in December, and they met in Libreville in March this year. And primarily what they've put in place is they've put working groups to discuss different issues that touch regulation, and with a common goal to harmonize these regulation across Africa. A very simple example is the One Africa Network, this roaming project that we want to provide or to give to our people, so that when someone leaves a country to another, is still within that zone, able to place call, receive call, SMS, and use data at very affordable rates. So the regulators decided to tackle this problem with the instruction of our head of state. I'm very glad to inform you that they decided to create a task force, and that task force met, and they worked on a draft regulation which was proposed to the regulators, and it was approved as a common and harmonized regulation across Smart Africa. So what does it mean? It means that our countries will have a more harmonized regulation, and it will allow people to experience the same environment as they move from a country to another country. Because currently, the moment you cross your country, you are subject to a total new regulation, and that makes sometimes a bit difficult to harmonize these efforts. So that's a very good example of a common effort that is under the leadership of regulators. But this is only one subset of the single digital market. There's a lot of other areas that need to be addressed. So we count on you during this conversation to tell us which are the top focus you would like to have. What are the key areas you would like us to focus on? And I'd like to thank you very much for sparing this time and for being with us today. So we hope you're going to enjoy this time, and we wish all of us a very productive engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Didier, for that foundation that you've laid for us. Some key points are housekeeping rules. If anyone needs translation, there are translation or interpretation instruments on the table. I think channel 1 is English and channel 2 is French. Didier has just given us an example of what we intend to do here. Now, at the policy level, those are kind of things that are going to happen. And we believe when we take it from policy level, we have now to start championing it and putting it into action. For instance, there are different institutions within respective countries that are in charge of implementing or putting in place some of the policy actions. You take them down from a policy and now you implement it. Why can't we set up something like that? Just a thought. Now, without much further ado, let me welcome Michael, who is going to paint a picture of what is happening at a policy level, or some of the key insights from an African perspective across the entire continent. Michael.
Thank you very much. Ministers, general directors, vice ministers, commissioners, directors, general managers, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here in participating in Transform Summit in Africa. Even though I live on the other side of the world, on the coast of China, Africa is now a key part of the daily news there. In particular, since the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was signed here 6 weeks ago. This is a great step forward. This will be one of the world's largest free trade areas in terms of the number of countries, covering more than 1.2 billion people, and an estimated 4 trillion if all companies join in terms of combined consumer spending. This is big by any measure anywhere in the world. The FTA will open up a significant number of countries to create a single continental market for goods and services, as well as a customs union, and with free trade of movement of capital and business travelers across the region. I've seen this work for over 40 years in Asia. In fact, I've been part of that transformation. According to the UN Economic Commission for Africa, intra-African trade is likely to increase by 52% under the free trade agreement and will double again upon further removal of non-tariff trade barriers. As Didier mentioned, 2013, the first agreement was met here for the Transform Africa Summit with the Smart Africa Manifesto, an excellent document that recognizes the importance that information communication technology, ICT, is an enabler of growth across the whole economic sectors within Africa. Significant achievements have been made over the past 5 years in enabling ICT, in particular addressing mobile infrastructure and access to the internet. Technology will play an increasing role in this. Virtually every cross-border transaction today has a digital component. In Europe, post-integration of the markets, just over 70% of trade is between EU countries. This figure is less in more fractured regions in Africa. In Asia, it's 51%, 19% in Latin America, but in Africa, it's only 15%. And this is what the FTA will address. To fully take advantage of this, the importance of the free flow of information for digital trade will be critical. Digital information flows were actually very, very low, even only 15 years ago. They now exert a larger impact on growth than centuries-old trade in goods and services, according to a recent McKinsey Global Institute report. The potential for growth is enormous and will add between 2 and 4% to GDP of countries that embrace free markets in digital trade. But there are challenges. They're not great ones, but they do need to be examined, discussed, and addressed. And today is that forum. First and foremost are the challenge of accessibility and affordability. According to the ITU, in 2017, half the world's population had access to the internet. However, internet user penetration in Africa was less than a quarter. But mobile phone penetration is double that. So clearly, there's room to move up there. Removing customs tariffs on the lowest end of smart mobile phones may address affordability, and adopting new technologies, such as the use of TV white space frequencies, may address the challenge of the last 100 miles, which is certainly a challenge within the central parts of Africa away from the coast. The benefits are clear. The International U.S. Trade Commission study showed that countries that adopt inter-regional digital trade can increase their GDP growth up to 40% more than those that are less connected. Technology companies have a major role to play here, and the great enabler of this will be what's known as hyperscale cloud computing services, or cloud CCS, that offers the potential for huge economies of scale, flexibility, and greater security that can drive increasing levels of cross-border trade. The technology is mature and delivers on the promise of enhancing economic, political, and cultural interdependence amongst nations that can dramatically accelerate cross-border information flows and service exchange. This also opens the door for African businesses, large and small, to compete globally. There are many marketplaces now which are available for companies to list on if they can get access at an affordable price. This may also enable development of regional markets and innovation which result in greater job creation, in particular for the youth. If you look at what's happening with digital services online, most of this is coming out from young people. They're the ones that are creating this. Just as important as trade in agricultural goods and services or information bits, in fact, is a separate business now that is driving growth worldwide. Education is a challenge and an opportunity. And the opportunity that's enabled by accessing the internet with massive online courses, for example, means that even people in the most remote places, if they have a connectivity and affordable, they can actually, literally can learn about rocket science. A World Economic Report from the IMF, April 2018, in part stated that a shift in employment from manufacturing to services need not hinder economy-wide productivity and growth. In fact, it was the opposite. It said the prospects for developing economies to gain ground towards advanced economy income levels are attainable, and that technology will be a key driver. So among the issues that may be discussed here today are issues of cross-border data flows, data privacy, competition policy, standard setting, security, data sovereignty, and IPR copyright. If implemented, an FTA that recognizes the value of trade in digital services will be a fully inclusive trade bloc for the 21st century, potentially equal to that of the EU, EFTA in Europe, or ASEAN, APEC in Asia. This is the digital chapter of the Continental Free Trade Agreement for Africa that is yet to be written. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Michael. There is a simple statistic that Michael just mentioned. If you look at the inter and intra-trade within Africa, is only at 15% compared to, let's say, Asia, which is at more than 50%. What does that tell us? What does that mean? And how can we move from that 15% to maybe 70% or even more? So I think that is what that's the cornerstone of what we're discussing here. That is what we are talking about here. Now, let me invite Robin from Darburg to come and now highlight some high critical principles that we need to look at from a digital point of view, and then we dive deep into the discussions, and she will take us through the processes and mechanics of how we're going to do that. Robin? By the way, my name is Innocent Muizi. I'm the CEO of Rwanda Information Sector Authority, which is an agency that is charged with implementing government IT programs in Rwanda. So just in case you're wondering who this person is who is in front of you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Innocent. Just see if we have the slides here as well. So by way of introduction as well, my name is Robin. I'm part of a company, a group of businesses actually. Let's see if we can. Called Dalberg. So we're a group of businesses focused on inclusive growth around the world, particularly here in Africa. And I lead our digital practice. So we've had the pleasure of moving you from listening to what is a very powerful story for what building a single digital market can do for the continent. We've heard the context, we've heard the opportunities. We all recognize there are many challenges. And so what we'd like to do now, and what I'd like to break us into, is the hard work of figuring out exactly where we start and how we invest our time and resources and capabilities collectively as a group, as part of Smart Africa, and even beyond. So my first question for you, I want to look across the table. Does everyone have in front of them pen and paper? I'd like you to just check your tables, because what we'd like to do is I'll outline a few principles and organizing principles for how we might think of the different kinds of policies that we're looking to address. And specifically, what we'd like to get out of the next 45 minutes or so is your input into the policy questions that are top of mind for you and that you would like to resolve over the next 12 to 18 months. The reason this is critical is because we can then look around the room, understand what are the shared policy priorities, where can we work together, and where can Smart Africa be a partner in actually advancing and facilitating the answers and solutions to some of the questions that we're grappling with. So I am seeing pens and paper across each, and in a few minutes I'll actually ask you to give some thought to what those policy priorities will be for you over the next 12 to 18 months. But let me start with a selection, with an organizing principle. Michael has shared some context with us this morning, as has Didier, in terms of where we've come from and where we're heading. The next real question is, how do we dig in and where do we dig in? Our friends at the World Bank have been spending a lot of time on this question, asking how do we comprise and how do we start to build a single digital market? The diagram you see here suggests that building a single digital market will be one that unlocks the opportunity to create competitive regional trade, facilitates economic growth, innovation, importantly, job creation and opportunities. And we've organized it into, if you will, four layers. The first layer, and I'm going to jump to the base of the pyramid, if you will, a single connectivity market. In other words, I'll work through these briefly. Apologies. In other words, thinking through the critical quality of infrastructure and connectivity that is necessary to allow citizens and businesses to engage. On top of that, we're talking about data. How do we ensure the right data flows? How do we ensure data is protected, secure, and that movement enables us for further transactions? Once we have that broader infrastructure in place, the next question becomes, how do we facilitate this online market? How do we ensure that consumers not only have access to this infrastructure, but can start to facilitate virtual transactions? Are the financing systems in place? Do they have access to the right logistics to be able to facilitate some of the commerce opportunities that we see? Are businesses able to be effectively online? And underneath, we then see the enabling environment, where we're looking across a suite of factors that will help to support building this environment. And that could range from skills. Do we have the right talent and capability, both to build new systems as well as to use these systems? Is the innovation environment also supporting this growth? We talk about hard infrastructure, the question of power. Do we have sufficient energy to be supporting this infrastructure that we're building? And we recognize that within this enabling environment, there are many other policies that may be in your purview that will be essential to moving us forward. So as I mentioned, in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to work through this question with us and identify within each category what are the 1 to 2 policy priorities that you have. Just quick reinforcement here, one more time. Within connectivity, I've mentioned the quality of infrastructure. We'll be thinking about things, whether it's spectrum allocation, infrastructure sharing, device affordability, the range of policies that you're likely thinking about that have to do with ensuring that the quality of and access to connectivity is there. Second, we'll be thinking through the opportunities to build the single data market. Again, a few examples of how are we thinking about classification, standards, interoperability, some of the cross-border data flows. As a third category, thinking about then how we enable opportunities for consumers, and that could be digital payment systems, interoperability, facilitating competition, logistics. And finally, the enabling environment. Again, and apologies the edit there, but thinking through some of the other factors, including capacity and skills and energy and leadership and other policies that will support this environment. So this is where we begin. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague James, who's going to walk through this exercise. But we want to start by understanding and hearing from you. What are the policy priorities that are top of mind as you're thinking about the next 12 to 18 months?
So actually, the first thing we'll do is pause and stop talking and let you all write. So we'll take 2 minutes. So in the room, we have people from public, private, and social sectors. Regardless of who you are, policy matters to you in some way. We're going to go back category by category, and we'll take a moment to note down 1 or 2 questions or key policy priorities for you over the next 12 to 18 months. No talking, just write what's top of mind for you in each of these categories. There'll be a lot of time to talk in a few moments, right? So shall we do that? So shall we go one by one? Do you need me to put them back on, or do you remember them? Let me do that, right? So under each one of them, and we'll talk about each one of them in sequence. Let's go back. Trying to go back. You cannot go back. Okay, great. Yeah. So why don't we start there? So let's take 2 minutes on the single connectivity market. Just if you haven't written down what you think of as your key priority. Does everyone understand what I'm asking you to do? I assume so, because I'm not seeing any questions. So under single connectivity market, does everyone now have something written down in terms of what they would see as the big question that they will be trying to resolve over the next 12 to 18 months, or a key priority on their minds? It could be nothing, but it's a deliberate nothing, as in I really don't care about this particular category of issues. All right? Then we'll go, bear with me. Take another minute. I'm trying to get it on the screen, but let's do the single data market next. I'm trying to pull it up for you. All right. And finally, the single online market. Well, not finally, there's enabling environment coming afterwards. These are only illustrative, right? So whatever is on here is just illustrative points. So under single connectivity market would be matters such as spectrum allocation, infrastructure, etc. Under single data market, issues that could be there, and this is non-prescriptive and non-comprehensive, would include matters such as classification, protection, privacy, interoperability, cross-border data controls, data flow, sovereignty, etc. And then finally, within the pyramid, the single online market. And the kinds of things that would fall in there would be digital payment platforms, interoperability, and competition. All right. To be comprehensive, the last area, just to recap again, is the enabling environment, and that included, per the World Bank framework, issues of digital skills, innovation environment, the hard infrastructure, capital financing, leadership and institutions, among others. And again, the thing here is, what are the big policy levers that exist within that category that you'd like to pull over the next 12 to 18 months? There's a lot of work to do, but narrowing it down. So quick question, has everyone managed to fill in some thoughts on each one of these? Raise your hand if you haven't been able to, if you'd like me to go through any of it again before we jump to the next part of the exercise. Great. So, assuming that we began to go through that exercise and recognizing that we are faced with calories in front of us, what I will now invite you to do is spend the next 10, 15 minutes as you sit at your tables enjoying lunch, share a little bit of what came up on your list. We're going to do this as a collective afterwards, but we're going to use the next 15 minutes or so to have discussions at our tables about these 4 categories and what each of us view as the big priorities in those 4 categories, and more broadly how we're thinking about policy. And then we'll come back to the second half of the exercise once you've had a chance to enjoy the delicious lunch. Thank you.
Let us now move on to the part of answering the questions that James and Robin set forth in front of us, identifying top policy issues that we are faced with. Okay, and I hope Robin and James are going to note this, but for instance, if I can think aloud, the 4th industrial revolution is actually here. But what does it mean for Africa as Africans? How do we conceive fourth industrial revolution, and how do we structure it so that we become on the high table, not on the menu? I think that is one pertinent question that we need to understand. But also maybe if you look at the bottom line, maybe the other question would be for our legislators or parliamentarians or lawmakers. Do they understand the digital revolution that we're in? When they sit in parliament to enact laws, do they understand and conceive it in the way in which it should be conceived? So I think these are also some of the questions that we also need to get answers for. Now, let me ask James now to take us through the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Innocent, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's the second bite at the same apple, and the meal break provided me with a chance to reflect and maybe think about our process a bit. One of the things that was pointed out is no one actually knows who I am, because I didn't bother to introduce myself. My apologies, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Mwangi. I'm Executive Director and Head of the Dalberg Group. And part of the reason I'm here is that we believe that beyond it being a technology question we're answering, the question of how of Africa's digital future is core to everything we're working on in terms of an inclusive and sustainable future for all. So this is an important question. So I've told you who I am. Let me get a sense of who you are. How many people in the room would identify themselves as being in government or the public sector? Raise your hand. Okay. Government or the public sector, more generally speaking. You could be a minister or working in a ministry or in a regulatory agency, etc. All right? Those who fit that category know themselves? Keep that in mind. It'll become relevant in a moment. How many of you view themselves as in business or the private sector? Some are keeping their hands a little bit short. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's a business that's not doing very well. Great. And how many don't fall into either of those categories and would categorize themselves as other? All right. Have I missed anybody? And if I did, then you weren't listening because you should have been in other. Great. Now, the reason that matters is we're going to try and get a sense of the room. This is not a scientific poll. This is not the basis on which Smart Africa strategy is going to be released. But as we get into the conversation now, it'll be important to understand where business, public sector, and others are in terms of thinking about some of these policies, right? That's a very innovative and entrepreneurial minister. Fantastic. So apparently there's a minister who does not necessarily view themselves as part of government. Everyone identifies differently. All right, so previously on this show, we had introduced our framework, right? And we talked about the three layers and the enabling environment that all go towards our single market. So, if you have not yet written down your key either policy question or policy priority for the next 12 to 18 months regarding the single connectivity market, you have 2 minutes to do so now. And again, the kinds of things that fall into that category include building quality infrastructure, spectrum allocation, device affordability, and so forth. All right. Is there anyone who has not yet had a chance to write down their major priority in this area? Great. All right. Let's put you all to work. Anyone want to read their priority? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to pick up one. We're going to see how many times it overlaps. Then we'll pick another one and another one until we've exhausted the list, and we'll actually do a live tally. This is a working session. We're in the lab together. I'm not here to present anything to you. We're working. All right, we're going to fill this in very, very, very short order. So, I'll start at this table. Someone is going to tell me what their major priority was. Only one, maximum two.
Hello. I'm going to read two. There are just so many because there are ministers here. Now, the first one is around the availability of critical infrastructure, critical backhaul infrastructure, that we do not have that. As much as there's been a growth in mobile communications, there is a need to pay attention to backhaul infrastructure if we are able to do this, both within countries and between countries.
Availability of backhaul infrastructure.
Yes.
That's one.
Then the next one is with regard to the need for common standards, policies around mobile money, mobile payment systems.
Mobile payment systems. Now that's probably going to come up in a later section. So we'll take how many people had. We'll take for this section. We'll focus on the backhaul infrastructure piece. We'll come back and we'll have the mobile payments in a subsequent section of this. Very quickly. So we've got one which is backhaul infrastructure. How many people in government had that as one of theirs? If you're identified as public sector or government, there's something around availability of backhaul infrastructure. Is it one of the two you had listed in this category? Raise your hand high if it is. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in government. 6, we need to be very careful how we are counting the votes here. And I see a 7 over there. All right, someone will audit these results later, but I think 7 is the number. So 7 from government. How many in business had highlighted availability of backhaul infrastructure in this category as a major issue? So please raise your hands high because it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's 4. How many in other? 2. All right. At this table, does someone else want to name another issue in this category that hasn't been named already? Anyone wants to share something from their list? On my right, all right, go.
Last mile infrastructure. Backhaul without a last mile, want to make big difference.
Great. Can't have backhaul without last mile. And you have another one? So we'll just add to the list and then we'll do the count at the end. So he'll go first and then you'll go next.
Cross-border interconnectivity.
Cross-border interconnectivity?
Yes.
So in the same discussion is the idea to look at it in an integrated way. So look at the whole network at every stage of the value chain of the internet, whether backhaul or last mile or first mile connection. But as we think about it, also think about leveraging alternative networks. So the power line, transmission lines, the road transmission lines in a regional approach. But as we think about regional, because it's the network effect, if there is one part of this network that is not there, then we don't reach the objective. So a holistic approach to connectivity, thinking also about alternative networks.
Okay. So the holistic, how each of these categories, how backhaul, last mile, cross-border, all put together into a holistic view of connectivity, and embedded in that is questions around alternative technologies, alternative approaches to connectivity. Are there any other policy areas? So that's the fourth one, the holistic view of the connectivity ecosystem. Any others? I feel like a game show host today. And you'll be, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should look at spectrum harmonization.
Spectrum harmonization. Thank you.
Infrastructure sharing, but more so affordability when you deliver the infrastructure.
Yeah, I think we had a nuance on the availability of backhaul infrastructure as well, that it should be on an open access basis. So just to add that.
Great. So that's a nuance. We'll reflect on this when we have the whole thing populated. Are there any other major topics in this area that haven't been raised by anyone? Because now we're going to start weighting them a little bit in terms of a sense of the room. All right, let's start weighting them because we've got to do this 3 more times. So on last mile infrastructure, our leaders in the public sector, how many of you had this as one of your 1 or 2 top priorities right now? last mile infrastructure. Government, please raise your hand if this was one of yours. I'm seeing no hands up. So no, this was not one of the top 3 priorities for any of the other folks from the public sector in the room. Any from business? Anyone have last mile infrastructure as one of their top 1 or 2 priorities at this time? You're not saying it's not important, it's a question of whether it's one of your top 1 or 2 at this time in this category. Again, seeing none. And please let me know if I've not seen you. Other, any of the folks in neither business nor government? And it's actually good to know when we have a few people who are focusing on something. And so other, we have 1, 2, 3. All right, so last mile, well, hands up unambiguously, please. We're having hanging chads here. We need to have very clear votes. Like, up, this is how you vote. All right, this is other. Anyone in other who had not had a chance to vote? I saw 3 people. Were there more than that? Oh, government. So there were 2 from government. All right, 3 from government. 4, all right. Okay. So 4 from government, none from business, 3 from other. On cross-border interconnectivity, government first, all right? We will close the polls after we have taken the count, so be on time. Government, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have 9 on cross-border interconnectivity for government. How many from business? I see 3. And how many from other? I see some people tended to have more than 2 priorities. I'm seeing people who've raised their hands more than twice. All right, I see 2. You don't get infinite votes. All right, a holistic view of the connectivity ecosystem. How many people had that in government? We had 1 and plus the person who'd raised it, so 2. How many in business? 1. And how many in other? We have a couple more of these to go, but Dr. Ture, I think you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was raising my hands. You were counting me as voting. I was not voting. I wanted to talk because what is confusing here is that you're putting things here that we need to prioritize, while there is, each of them is a part of a puzzle. If you take any one of them, the whole thing falls.
Yes.
So you can't prioritize them here.
I think the question here is getting a sense of the room. I take your point.
No, what you have to prioritize, from my standpoint, is within each of them, some of the milestones that need to be achieved in them, beside them, then where you can prioritize. But because each and every one of these things is important, and therefore you can't be voting on this.
So I think that is I think, correct. I would say understanding what the entry point is that most people are seeing as their primary entry point into the issue can be useful as a way of structuring an approach. And so the goal here is not to come up and say, this one matters and that one doesn't. It is to say that if you're introducing this topic, the version of it that resonates the most with the people in this room is one that starts with this area versus that. However, if that does not feel like the way to proceed, we can actually do away with the ranking and weighting. That's an attempt to clarify where the room is. We can just generate a long list and leave it at that. Does that resonate as a stronger way of moving forward, also with an eye on time? Taking Dr. Ture's guidance. Okay, so we skip the numbering and we just get to putting down some of the ideas that resonate with the room. Or do you like the numbering? People like the numbers. All right, so let's be clear. The numbers are by no means making any decision. They're just to give you a quick sense, right? So Dr. Ture is correct. We cannot pick one piece of this quote and say it's the only part that matters. But it is important to us to know which parts of this resonate the most with the group And so if people feel like that's a useful exercise, we'll continue with it. We will try and go through it quickly. Does that leave everyone satisfied? Both those who recognize that you can't tear these things apart, as well as those who do want to get a sense of where people stand. Does that leave you both satisfied? I'm trying to structure a compromise. I think everyone is equally unhappy with me. That means I'm winning. Okay. I am going to be in a lot of trouble after this. All right. We're doing this purely as a fun exercise because people seem to be into it. Very, very quickly, on spectrum harmonization. Or had we finished with the holistic view of the ecosystem? Yeah, okay. Anyone in other in the category of other? No. All right. Spectrum harmonization. How many have this as a major priority that they will be focusing on in this area in the coming 12 to 18 months from the public sector? And again, we want to get through this quickly, so the higher the hands are raised, the better we can see them and move on. 1, 2. Okay, 2. Business. I see 2. And other? Other? Or business? Also, there were 3 in business and 1 in other. So we are running short of time because we ate slowly and we started late and so on. So we're going to, on the last ones here, I'm going to stop differentiating, right? Because it's generating useful data, but we don't have time to do the differentiated vote. So how many people found infrastructure sharing as a very resonant topic in this space? Yeah, everyone, just everyone who thought it was one. Yeah, we're doing 1 total. We're not going to differentiate. Under infrastructure sharing, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, I'm going to ballpark that at about 20. And on affordability, okay, I see about 12, maybe 14. Let's call it 14. Okay. Again, very clearly, what I'm trying to do here is give people just a rough sense of the weight of the room. This is not a non-scientific process. We're just going to jump through to the next slide very quickly now because we do not have time. So on the single data market, again, people write down what they have. And what we'll focus on is getting the list right. I think we'll do a weighted polling later because we just don't have the time. We'll get, the most important thing is to get the topics on your mind. All right? So I'll go around, and once, if your topic has been said, that's fine. Let's see if we can get all of the key topics that people have on their minds. So under the data market, data policies, let's start there.
Okay, so I'm quite concerned about data protection harmonization, which is very critical to ensuring that. Also, cross-border data issues, also data residency issues, and then building a system of trust, data quality and integrity, as well as trust, creating an enabling system for trust.
All right. Any additional ones that someone had that haven't been covered?
Is on cybersecurity, that we need a harmonized system for cybersecurity in Africa.
Okay. Cybersecurity. Moderator, you are also a member of the audience.
GDPR. What is our position as Africa on the GDPR?
Great. Anything else that's not on the list? Right. What we will do is, in terms of the weighting, we will actually poll you electronically afterwards. So we have a comprehensive list of the things that are on people's minds with regards to data policy. Let's do the same kind of exercise now on the single online market. Or did I miss one from the previous one? All right. My apologies, I am flying through now.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Amrata, for this very useful exercise and reminder, because many of these things not only have been undertaken by the African through the EU first and through the ATU are working on and are advancing. So I want to, before we go any further, to thank you and highlight that many of these things already exist. Many of the countries around here have already signed the convention for cybersecurity, personal data protection, and that the strategies, the harmonization policies have also been done through the REX and other entities and through the EU. So I want to thank you and thank everyone present to highlight that we have already went a very long way on many issues. Not to mention, of course, the great agreement with which to start.
Indeed. Thank you very, very much for that comment. And again, it makes a very important reminder, which is this is not to say that these are things that are not happening that need to happen or things that are already happening that haven't happened well. It's just to understand what is top of mind for people in each category as we move forward within the framework. But thank you for that reminder and that clarification. Were there any other policies related to data that someone wanted to add to our list that we will poll you on? So cross-border.
You are talking here regional borders.
Yes.
But it's also across services, data migration between...
between services. Okay, yes, okay. Migration of data between different services and service providers. So the borders of businesses versus the borders of nations. Fantastic. Okay.
And the second point I would like to highlight is identity is a critical problem. Identity within countries are a challenge. So when you are looking at the continent, digital identity needs to be considered how you tackle that.
Fantastic. Digital identity. Great. Does that feel like a good list on which we will poll your level of focus in subsequent follow-up activity? There's nothing that was missed in this area. Sir. You can have mine if...
Merci. Sorry, I'm going to speak French. Tout à l'heure, j'ai entendu, on n'a pas beaucoup de temps. Peut-être que, comme l'a dit la commissaire, l'objectif qui a été présenté par le modérateur tout au début consiste à l'harmonisation des politiques de régulation pour l'effectivité du marché commun digital africain. Je pense que... you need the translation.
Je parle français un petit peu seulement.
Voilà. Voilà, je pense que le plus important, c'est qu'au sortir de cette salle, qu'on soit tous édifiés et qu'on partage ensemble les difficultés que les uns et les autres rencontrent et les différents points où on a besoin d'un appui ou d'une solidarité d'un pays vers un autre, d'une région vers une autre région. Madame la commissaire a dit tout à l'heure, depuis 2007, il existe un cadre de référence pour l'harmonisation des politiques de développement des TIC en Afrique, adopté par tous les ministres africains et validé par le sommet des chefs d'État et de gouvernement. Donc c'est un document officiel africain. Et ce document a bénéficié, avec l'appui de l'UIT, à travers IPSA, d'une transposition au niveau des communautés économiques régionales. Et au sein des communautés économiques régionales, il y a eu des transpositions au niveau des pays. La Convention africaine sur la cybersécurité et la protection des données à caractère personnel, qu'on appelle la Convention de Malabo, a aussi été validée par la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement et les ratifications sont en cours. Il y a un certain nombre de pays qui ont ratifié, y compris le mien. Il existe également des documents de politique et de stratégie nationale de développement des TIC dans les pays et dans certaines communautés. Aujourd'hui, je pense qu'on devait partir sur l'état des lieux, présenter ce qui existe en Afrique, les différentes avancées, les lacunes, où est-ce qu'on peut mettre l'accent, s'il y a de l'accent à mettre, pour pouvoir mettre en avant cette solidarité qui gouverne l'Alliance Mat-Africa, pour aider ceux qui, aujourd'hui, font face à des... Mais si on se met dans un exercice où il faut tout reparcourir comme si on commençait à zéro, je pense que le temps va finir. Au sortir de la salle, on va se demander qu'est-ce que ça a servi. Et quand on se retrouve, c'est de dire, au sortir de la salle, qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire demain? Qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire après-demain? Quel est le résultat auquel on s'attend? Donc, il faut partir d'abord de l'état des lieux, les statistiques qui existent. Qu'est-ce qui est fait au niveau de l'Afrique du Nord, de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, de l'Afrique de l'Est, de l'Afrique du Centre et de l'Afrique australe? Et au sein de ces régions, quels sont les pays qui ont atteint quel niveau? Parce qu'aujourd'hui, beaucoup de choses sont faites. Beaucoup d'informations existent. Et toutes ces choses qui ont été faites concourent à la consolidation de ce marché commun ou de cette zone de libre-échange africaine avec sa déclinaison sur le secteur des TIC.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think that is a fair point. And the goal here, I do want to clarify.
Before we go any further, this is a gentle reminder to all countries to please ratify the Cybersecurity and Data Protection Convention. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you for that. I think, again, the context here is important. This is should not be taken as a decision-making meeting of any sort. We're having lunch together and trying to understand what, as policymakers and stakeholders, is top of mind for us right now. It is an input alongside the work that is already ongoing and the work that's already been done into helping Smart Africa and others in this room determine where they want to focus their time. So it's purely an input and a sense from a group of people who don't often get to sit across the table from each other on what they are thinking about, right? So I am not in any way suggesting that we're making a binding decision here that forecloses any avenue. However, there are people whose work depends on understanding what their stakeholders, many of whom are in the room, want them to do. And the more we can give them clarity on what the stakeholders want, the more helpful they can be. So again, just being clear about the modesty of the exercise, but also hopefully the value of the exercise. And I think some of you did find that it resonated in terms of just seeing what things were on the minds of your colleagues. Who might you kind of be sharing ideas with and collaborating with? So that's the only goal here, is to get everyone to understand where everyone else is coming from at this point in time. All right? So with your permission, and I recognize, again, it's always the challenge of taking on a moderating role in an open-ended exercise, that there are many more detailed pieces of work that have been done. What I'll do is I'll try and get a similar list for the last two categories, and then we can go back into deep reflection on how it fits into the broader agenda. All right? So with your permission, let's scroll over to were there any other comments from the floor? And if not, great. On the online market, and within the online market, again, what we're trying to get a sense of is what are the big questions, the big policy considerations over the next year or so that people think will be front of mind. Examples here could include the issues around digital payment platforms, interoperability of the same, ensuring competition in digital marketplaces, etc. What kinds of questions, when you hear that topic, when you look at this framework that was provided by the World Bank, what kinds of questions are top of mind going into the next 12 to 18 months for you? Any suggestions? I see I'm competing with food again, which is always a bad place to be. Sir.
No, thank you. I think, like we said, the issue of payment systems.
Yes.
Applications for Africa. We can't use foreign applications and which drains our revenue. I think as African continent, we must look into that extensively. The other one, which is important to us.
And is that specifically for cross-border payments? Implicitly in what you've said, it sounds like it ties more to cross-border, but it could be domestic as well.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Within and between countries.
Yeah.
Most of us are using Visa, and MasterCard, PayPal. We need applications which are African-based so that we can keep some of the revenue. I think that's a point. Whether we're using it domestically or across our region. That's what we encourage. The last point, to me, we are a member of G20. There is a big push to open rules for free digital trade, this e-commerce thing. Our approach, and we hope that as African brothers and sisters will look into this seriously, is that, yes, we will open at some stage, but we must start by building capacity through partnerships with developed online companies other than just opening the rules for trade, because we'll be flooded in our market and we won't get anything. So the collaboration, particularly the African free trade thing, offers us that opportunity as African countries to define our own rules, because any free trade agreement without rules, it will fail. If we can prioritize the definition of these e-commerce rules within the African free trade area.
So indigenized payment systems and e-commerce rules are two. Any others people would add in this category? Thank you.
My concern would be competition protection to ensure that whole industries aren't wiped out due to the opening up of borders.
Thank you.
I would also add consumer protection to that as well.
Okay. Consumer protection?
Yes.
So I think it was mentioned in another segment, but also digital ID is a key element as well.
Anyone else have something in their top two that wasn't one of these?
Merci. Moi, je voulais ajouter à propos du paiement mobile, à commencer par les opérateurs télécoms doivent être prêts et accepter à encaisser leurs factures par les cartes Visa déjà. Dans certains pays, comme les miens, l'opérateur n'a pas prévu les matériels nécessaires pour encaisser les paiements de ses clients. Et c'est dommage. Il travaille dans le numérique, il n'est pas prêt à recevoir. Mais sinon, une autre parenthèse, l'Alliance, chaque année, s'aperçoit qu'il y a de nouvelles adhésions, c'est-à-dire de nouveaux pays nous rejoignent. Il faut qu'il y ait au moins quelque chose de palpable ou de tangible, tel que le roaming. On doit faire une chose effective et réalisée concrètement pour que ceux qui nous rejoignent en cours de route puissent commencer là où nous sommes et prendre les pas en même temps que les autres. Déjà, nous assistons, au début c'était 6 pays, 17 pays. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes à la moitié, 50% du continent qui font partie de cette alliance. Si au fil du temps, au fil des années, de nouvelles adhésions s'aperçoivent et que quelque chose de tangible n'est pas réalisé, ce sera un peu dommage. Merci.
Thank you for that reminder on the need to maintain momentum. And in addition, the point around enablers of E and payments infrastructure to include our small and medium enterprises in our respective countries. I think that was the key point, the payments infrastructure and rolling that out so that we can actually include the actors in our own environments. Shall we flip to the last of these, the broader enabling environment? Just to compile a list, unless there was anything left on this previous one. Okay, no, hearing none. Under enabling environment, we talked about things like skills, digital skills, labor policy, enabling infrastructure such as energy, questions around capital and investment financing, and so on. What are the key things in the enabling environment that are top of mind right now? And the answer to this is always there's a lot of things under enabling environment. The real question is, which are the one or two that the decision makers in this room are going to be most focused on in the next 12 to 18 months? So again, anyone want to offer a view? Please.
So skills, development, and then leadership and institutions.
Okay. Skills development, and then separately leadership and institutions. Okay.
I think, I don't know if it falls under leadership and institutions, but the point I mentioned about our legislators having a good understanding of the digital space.
There's definitely something around legislative capacity building and awareness. As this becomes a bigger and bigger part of the whole economy, we need digitally aware legislators. Any other big topics top of mind around the enabling environment at this point in time? Casey?
Thanks. One of the things as the World Bank, when we did a similar consultation in East Africa that came up primarily from the private sector side, was the issue of harmonized taxation policy, as well as business registration, which is particularly important for online services and e-commerce, because companies may be domiciled in one country but offering services or transactions in another, and you can either end up getting double or triple taxed or not taxed at all if there's not coordination.
Exactly. Over there.
One of the most important things for enabling the environment is the adoption of standards for every aspect that you can imagine.
So consistent standards. We will go 1 and then 2. The gentleman in the blue suit and then the lady.
One thing I would consider intellectual property rights, IPR.
Great. Intellectual property. And then to your neighbor.
So creating a strong pool of entrepreneurs who can create the content that is locally relevant. So it's made in Africa.
Exactly. So entrepreneur support. Great. Please.
Some form of compulsory courses in terms of education, and to be brought very early, at a very early stage, so that our students can have some sort of exposure to regional integration and ICT.
So is that about digital literacy with a regional lens to it?
Exactly.
Okay. Great. Right. Seems like a good list. Any other big questions around the enabling environment that are top of mind for people in this room right now? And again, this is not all you're working on, it's just a question of which are the burning priorities. Great. So with that, what I might suggest we do is we'll just very quickly refer back to what we have on the screen. And what we're going to do, I think there's been a useful number of interventions. When we started the exercise, and I'll be honest, we had expected to have a slightly smaller group of people. We thought it would be quite easy to get a sense of where people from business, government, and other sectors might be on some of these topics. I think Dr. Toure raised a good point, which is it's very hard to tease out these topics sometimes, and they're very much interrelated. And in addition, with a much larger group, it's harder to get a sense and even a meaningful sense. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use this as a list that gets us started on coming back to you in a dialogue on figuring out which ones are the real top priorities and how they might be configured. But to recap again, we seem to be having remote control issues. So we started off with connectivity policy, or the connectivity space and the single connectivity market. And the ideas that came up, ignore the tallies. That was a legacy aspect of the exercise. Availability of backhaul infrastructure, last mile infrastructure, cross-border connectivity, interconnectivity, a holistic view of how these elements fit together and might be affected by alternative technologies and so on. Decisions in one country might affect decisions in others. Sorry? Yeah. Spectrum harmonization, infrastructure sharing, and affordability. Right? We then went on to look at the single data market. And there we talked about data protection harmonization, cross-border data, data residency, data quality and integrity, including trust, cybersecurity, the implications of GDPR, which are far-reaching, management of data across businesses, so we talk a lot about national borders, what about business boundaries, and finally, digital identity. Following our way through the pyramid, we then looked at the single online market. And within that, some of the things that are top of mind for people in the room included digital payment systems. So the whole question of, particularly with an indigenous flair to them, both for inter and intra-country and intra-regional payments. E-commerce rules, competition protection, consumer protection, digital identity again, and inclusive payments infrastructure, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. And then finally, under the enabling environment, we talked about skills, development, leadership and institutions, legislative capacity and awareness, harmonized taxation, business registration, some standards across products and services, intellectual property rights, entrepreneurial support and skills for that made in Africa narrative that we wanted to build, and digital literacy that has, again, a little bit of a regional dimension to it. So all of this will be coming to you in a range of ways. This is input that helps shape the conversation that Smart Africa is looking to have with its stakeholders in terms of what's top of mind for them and understanding where it can focus its activities. As we come to the conclusion of that, I wanted to see if there are any last comments or reflections. Casey, I don't know from the World Bank if there was some thoughts that you wanted to share on your framework, et cetera.
No, so just to really thank everybody, and coming to the summit, there is the beginning of a very nice symphony that we're all hearing. The importance of looking at ecosystem approach to make sure that we get to the digital development as fast as possible, and the approach of thinking regional, because really the competition is very fierce out there, and the ones that are making it to the top are the ones who are thinking big. So thinking regionally is really a very good approach to get the continent where it needs to be. So from our side, we did some analytical work on the single digital market for East Africa, and the results are incredibly interesting, and we'll be happy to share this with everybody. But this is on a small scale. If we think bigger than East Africa, then the results will be extremely positive. So we just really look forward to continuing the collaboration with you and with the governments, with the regulators, with the private sector. This is definitely a space that no one can do it alone. And the more we sing together in the symphony, I think the more beautiful it will be for all of us. Thank you.
On that very musical note, I'll thank you all for agreeing to,
Thank you very much. My name is Aurélie Adam Soule. I'm the Minister for Digital Economy and Communication in Benin. Sorry for disturbing your conclusion, but I thought it would be good to share a conversation that we had at the beginning of this roundtable, and which was not actually addressed through the work we did here. I'm sorry, I have questions. I don't have answers. Don't ask me for answers. But I'm sure that the room will, help us find those answers. What we discussed here is that, well, we are looking at data market. We are looking at connectivity. And of course, we are also looking at being online, online presence. The question that arises from there is, if we tick all those three boxes, does it mean Africa is then a free trade market for the digital economy? Which way, which we're questioning the approach. It doesn't mean that the work we did is not important. It is. All those areas are important to address. But then if they are addressed, does it solve the initial issue that we're trying to address here, being a single digital market? We weren't aligned on the answer. The other question or questions were, when we talk about market, be it digital or physical or any kind of market, when you go to a market, you have buyers, people who come to buy. You have sellers and you have goods. So what are the sellers here? Who are there? Who are there? Who are the buyers? What are we trying to sell or to buy? Because the approach is different. If you want to have a digital single market, Africa as a single digital market for Africa, or Africa as a single digital market for people outside of Africa, it's not the same approach. And we really need to look at, this angle as well, so that on the prioritization front, we know which area to address first to be a market for ourselves. Or if the strategy is to be a market for, it can be, it's fair enough to also aim to be a market for people outside Africa. Because if we want to be a market for ourselves, then we need to find the sellers in Africa and the buyers in Africa. And then prioritization will be different from the other way. So that's the conversation we had in the beginning, and we didn't find answers, only questions. And I think it's worth maybe emphasizing this as we conclude the excellent work that we did here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. As a moderator or facilitator, you're often struggling with how to end. Is it a summary? Is it a call to action? I'm very glad you've spared me from that choice by delivering a very deep and profound set of questions for us to close with. These are all necessary elements. They are clearly not sufficient. How do we not lose sight of the forest for the trees and make sure that we're really focusing on what does it take to get a market to work? And if that was simple and easy to answer, we'd have done it already. So let's understand that we don't have the answers, but we need to go through a process of guided exploration. Thank you all for participating in the exercise, for being a part of the conversation, which I hope will continue and deepen and build on some of the other work that's already been done to date. And with that, I'll hand you back over to Innocent, our moderator.
Thank you, James. And I think here we are at a very, very interesting point in this discussion for two particular reasons. There's good work that the team has done, but however, there are two fundamental questions that have been raised. One, by the Honorable Minister, who just raised a very interesting question, is that does a single African digital market mean that a person in Rwanda who has a need can get a product from Benin or Cote d'Ivoire? Or does it mean that somebody in South Africa who had a need is going to get that product from China or USA or whatever? I think that is an interesting question of which you don't have answers for now, right now. But also what has been raised by the Honorable Minister, I think from Guinea, and Madam Commissioner, there's a lot of work that has already been done. Now, where are we as regional blocks, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, or individual countries? So this is clearly a statement that we still have more work to bring all these things into harmony, so that we have an understanding of where we are, the challenges that we're embarking on. Now, with that question in mind that we have to find an answer for, let me invite Didier, who is going to now sort of paint a picture for us on how do we move forward from a Smart African point of view, and also who will now usher us into the next discussion briefly on what actually is taking place, on the concrete actions from ideas and the vision to action. Didier.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Innocent, for this summary. And I'd like, before even saying anything, thank each of us for such a very productive and intense conversation we had about this important topic that's brought us here during this session of this edition of Transform Africa. And I'd like to say that all these conversations have been captured. What the team has been doing is we're working on a paper that will be shared with all the participants in this room and others who couldn't make, couldn't be here for this important session. And the idea is that all the conversation, all the input that have been taken are reflected in that paper and shared with all of you. There was an attempt to do a poll, but I think this room doesn't represent every category, every key stakeholder. So we'll attempt to make that step so we can actually deepen a little bit the conversation. And this paper will be shared, conversation will continue, and indeed, as Innocent said, we need to also get a better understanding about what has been done, so we actually create synergies than actually duplicate any work which is being done. So you can count on us and the team that is working on this paper to ensure that it's made properly and take into account the existing work. Now, as we continue this conversation, there'll be different meeting points where we'll also have the opportunity to meet physically. There are, in the future, opportunities such as the ITU Telecom World, where many of you attend also. We usually have a session during the ITU Telecom World, and we look at creating, again, such an environment so we can actually go to the next step and also get to wrap up this engagement. So I would like just quickly to transition to this, which is, will take us just 15 minutes, and then so we can now have enough time to move towards the next session for this afternoon and the closing of the Transform Africa Summit. It's mainly from all this discussion, as well as we're doing all this understanding, prioritization, things need to start happening on the ground. Many of you are already informed that we have key pillars in Smart Africa. Seem not to work. Okay, it's a little bit slow. All right, so that's the picture already where Smart Africa is, a very powerful picture. It doesn't have our 2 new additions, and we'll make sure it's properly reflected. Yesterday, the chairman of the board of Smart Africa, President Kagame, welcomed Zambia and Ghana, our new latest countries, to join the Smart Africa Alliance. And it's represent today over 600 million people. And why we have this discussion is just to make this single digital market a reality. So it's seamless for people moving within Africa. It's not only for the one in blue here, but for the entire continent. So we identified a few priorities. As part of Smart Africa. One is infrastructure. The second is content and applications and services, and also capacity building and services. So there were different conversations about this, and we believe that things need to happen on the ground. It's one thing to mention this, but it's another thing to actually make them happen on the ground. So we wanted just to share with you the next presentation with Samba, who is also in this room, where he's going to talk about financing some of this infrastructure, and we will just to share with you some of the things that we want to do within the next 10 minutes, as I promised. I will not keep you long, but we're really going to make sure that this happens within the 10 minutes, as I mentioned earlier. Samba, are you here? I can ask you if you can proceed. I think he has probably moved a little bit. So I will help him a little bit just before he comes, so he can actually give a few insights. So it's So the whole idea is actually to move all these conversations from vision to action. There are a lot of important initiatives that are going to happen in the near future. And the idea is we make a specific focus on some of the key priorities. And those include fiber optic networks, cross-border connectivity that was mentioned during this conversation, construction of data centers, as well as a way to bridge the digital divide, especially for rural areas, so they are not left behind in some of these conversations we're having. So the Smart Solar Labs, it's an idea really of a community, a tangible community infrastructure that can serve the communities in rural areas using energy, solar panel, capacity building, and connectivity in schools and universities. So what are the key performance indicators, the KPIs, is being able actually to measure how many kilometers of additional fiber is being added in interconnecting countries. You have many countries where fiber is just 5-10 kilometers from the border, and countries are not interconnected. So that's one of the quick wins that can actually happen. Data centers. We have a lot of content that is actually hosted outside of the continent. And this it's depriving the continent of having the opportunity to host its own content locally. It also makes the cost of the internet also a little bit more expensive, without talking about the latency, but also it's depriving also new opportunities for investment in Africa. So it's one of the priorities that's another KPIs that is going to be mentioned, and also literacy, because this also it's a quick win that can happen. So financing instrument mechanisms that are immediately available include private sector funding, development banks, bilateral funding, financial structuring with universal access fund, but also innovative financing. Looking at model, for example, of, I don't know, a single tax that can happen once that can actually help to fund, for example, a specific infrastructure, like a one-time taxation, but that's an example. So we're looking at, for the first phase, between 2018 and 2021, with a focus on infrastructure and capacity building to raise $5 billion worth of projects. And here is the fiber optic, the data centers, and other projects. And for phase 2, with a focus on content application, service, and capacity building, we'll determine what is the next step of funding that we'll be doing, reflecting on the phase 1 as well as phase 3. So we're looking really at a 12-year target between now and 2030. So in terms of timeline, we like to work with countries. So first of all start with our own drive and our own ownership. So we, first of all, would be to appoint country focal point, but also to have MOUs specifically on countries on this specific initiative, because the priority varies from a country to another. Some will probably have more interest on data center, while others could have more interest, for example, on fiber optic. And after that, they will conduct a quick study about feasibility study of what needs to be done, and then the year 2019 will be a year of mobilizing financing, with a view of starting to implement this project in 20 and 21. And it jumped a little bit far. The idea is actually to get, for each country, a focal point. I mentioned that, sign an MOU, and also the countries will provide support and facilitation, the local logistics, to the consulting team that is going to approach the different countries. And for Smart Africa, the idea will be to establish a joint public and private sector follow-up committee that is going to targeting different meetings that we'll have, as we have on the sideline of Transform Africa Summit or the AU Summit, to actually focus and check on the progress. But we're also going to recruit people who are going to focus on this, because it's an important work that needs to have a team of account managers that follow the different countries and provide facilitation for this exercise to happen. And coordination, and of course mobilizing of the funding. So I'd like to invite Samba just for a few words about this financing and his experience. And since I've just used 5 of the 10 minutes, he'll just use the remaining to give some of the insight as we head for the conclusion of this. Thank you very much.
This one. Thank you. Regarding financing of infrastructure, I think the question is just us country coming together, because nowadays there's a lot of financial instruments that are available. With Smart Africa, bringing country together, I think it won't be a big challenge. So far, personally, on my single level, I help structure more than, I was saying, if I make the calculation today, $2.460 billion. And if I add the project that we're gonna launch in Senegal in the next 2 months, this is $150 million. That's a project called Smart Senegal, will be more than 2.6 billion. So where we are today is just to make sure that we're coming together, public sector and private sector. So with the fact that in each, the flagship country for this Africa interconnection is Guinea. I think Guinea minister yesterday explained the situation about that. And we could think about a regional approach. If you took a country like Guinea, who's the only country in ECOWAS who have 6 borders, we could interconnect the 6 borders and then go to the interconnection up to Senegal with a submarine cable. Because on Smart Senegal project, there is a submarine cable interconnection. This is for the first time. And I know it was a big fight to make it happen. And for the first time, government will have its own connection on the submarine. This is something that we need to applaud. So what we need to do is action. It is possible. We need to come together. Like you say, in every country, focal point need to be appointed. MOU need to be signed with different African countries, with Smart Africa, to make sure that the roadmap is clear. So today, we already have first funding for the feasibility study of this project. So this is something that we need also to applaud the Ministry of Guinea Minister of Telecom, who did a lot of work to make that happen with negotiation with Tata. So that's it, something that is already in place. So in the coming month, we just need to make sure that all the country state members sign the MOU in order to finish that feasibility study. Once that feasibility study is finished, now we can approach the financing model. So in each country, what I will advise to have private sector to invest into that management. So in each country, we'll have engagement of private sector. And also, we can have different financing model with, can be bilateral, can be multilateral. So this is available. So today, what we need to do is to come together and make sure that we have the same vision for the same goal. So on this regard, I also like to thank very well President Kagame for his vision, because when we start this discussion, I remember the minister who is in, the former minister of ICT, who played a key role into that organization with Amadou and President Conde, who make sure that the vision was there and the push was there. So today, there's funding available. We're talking about 5 billion. If in a couple of years I could bring 2.6 billion, I don't think with all this organization approach, we could not bring 5 billion in 1 year. It's not impossible. We just need to come together, put our effort together, and things will move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Samba, for actually telling us that the issue is not funding, but rather we need to be organized and we make sure that we get this funding. So I think now the call to action has already been made. I think our key takeaways is let's get together, let's get organized, let's harmonize our efforts through Smart Africa Secretariat to be able to see how do we realize this objective of having one single digital market across Africa. And with that, I want to humbly thank and immensely thank all of you for being very patient with, especially me, who kept on interrupting your good lunch, and being very participative, because at your respective levels with this kind of detailed engagement, it was very pleasing. Now, a few announcements. We'd like to invite everybody to the Smart Africa Women Summit at 3:30 in the main auditorium, which will include awarding Miss Geek, Smart Africa. So at 3:30, we meet in the auditorium where it's the Smart Africa Women Summit, plus we'll give an award to Miss Geek. And thereafter, the closing ceremony will follow straight. Without much further ado, I would like to thank everyone and say let's now jump into action to ensure that we achieve the single African digital market objective. Thank you very much.